All right, you ready to dive in? Today we're tackling Islamic finance. And let's just say we're not just dipping our toes in, we're going deep.
Deep dive for sure, especially with someone like Harris Irfan as our guide.
Right. I mean, this interview you sent over, wow, he doesn't hold back. Calling Islamic banking, and I'm quoting him here, an oxymoron.
Yeah, he's definitely got strong opinions. But he's earned the right to have them. I mean, this isn't just some theoretical debate for him. This is his life's work, his struggle even, you could say.
So that's what we're grappling with today. Can Islamic finance truly exist within the system as we know it? Like, is that even possible?
It's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And Irfan's journey is, well, it's not what you'd expect. I mean, the guy starts as a physicist, physics, then somehow ends up in the world of high finance.
That's quite the career pivot.
Yeah.
So how do you go from, like, studying the universe to what? Building Islamic financial products at Deutsche Bank?
It's a wild ride, right? He talks about how he gets recruited to Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest players in the game, and basically gets handed this insane task. Like, imagine being told to make any investment, anything, Sharia compliant.
Anything. Even, like, I don't know, investing in a casino.
He actually uses the example of pork belly futures in the interview. Pork belly futures. That was the challenge, to create these, I don't know what to call them, financial tools, I guess, structures. He called it a financial Manhattan project.
A financial Manhattan project? That sounds intense. Okay, so what are these tools? How do they work? Like, are we talking about some kind of, I don't know, Sharia loophole here?
They're often called Sharia wrappers. Basically, ways to kind of purify, I guess you could say, the returns of these, well, unconventional investments, to put it mildly.
Okay, I gotta be honest, my brain's already starting to hurt, but I'm trying to follow. So how does a Sharia wrapper even work? And are they legit, like for real?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's where Irfan's story gets really interesting. See, one of the core principles of Islamic finance, like the bedrock, right, is the prohibition of riba. Basically, any kind of exploitative interest or profit you make from a loan.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. No shady interest rates, exploiting people.
Exactly. And Irfan starts to realize that a lot of these Sharia wrappers, on the surface, they look compliant, but dig a little deeper. And they're often just clever ways to kind of sidestep that core principle of avoiding riba.
Yeah.
He became super disillusioned with it.
So what you're saying is some of these Islamic financial products, they might not be so Islamic after all.
That's his argument. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, You could dress it up, make it look nice, but it's still, at its core, the same thing.
And that's where this whole oxymoron idea comes in.
Bingo. He comes to believe that genuine Islamic banking, like the real deal, can't exist within a system built on debt and interest, like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, Just doesn't work.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm starting to see where he's coming from. But what about Islamic fintech? There's a lot of buzz about that these days, all these new companies popping up, claiming to be doing things differently.
Right, and that's definitely a whole other layer of this. But I got to say, Irfan's, let's just say, he's not sold on a lot of it.
Really? Why not?
He sees many of them falling into the same traps, relying on workarounds and loopholes instead of really building genuinely Islamic models from the ground up.
Like, give me an example. What kind of workarounds?
So you see a product with a halal label on it and you think, okay, good to go, right? But Irfan argues that a lot of times it's just window dressing. Like take commodity murabaha, for example.
Commodity murabaha. Yeah, you even have to break that one down for me.
So say you need a loan, right? But they can't charge you interest directly. So what they do is they buy a commodity, like some metal or whatever, on your behalf. Then they mark up the price, sell it to you, and you pay them back in installments. Technically, no interest, but they're still making a profit. Financial sleight of hand.
So it's like they found a loophole, not a real solution.
Exactly. Irfan actually compares it to, get this, a shady practice used by medieval Christian financiers to get around their own rules on usury, on charging interest.
Wow, so we're talking about a tale as old as time here.
Right. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, as they say. And that's kind of Irfan's point, that these fundamental problems, they keep popping up in different forms. And that's what led him to start looking for a completely different system altogether, something outside the traditional financial world as we know it.
Okay, now you've got me on the edge of my seat. What did he land on?
Get ready for this. Bitcoin.
Wait, Bitcoin? Seriously? That seems like, I don't know, a bit of a leap. How does a digital currency, decentralized and all that, fit into, like, centuries-old Islamic principle?
I know, right? Sounds crazy at first. But Irfan makes a surprisingly compelling case. He actually argues that Bitcoin, in a way, embodies the true spirit of Islamic finance better than even gold.
Okay, now you have to explain that one. How is Bitcoin more Islamic than gold? I mean, it's not like it's mentioned in the Quran or anything.
Well, it's not about a literal interpretation.
Right.
It's about the principles. See, Irfan's argument is that Bitcoin, unlike, say, fiat currency, which governments can just print out of thin air, Bitcoin is inherently scarce. There's a finite supply. It also requires actual work, proof of work to mine, which means it has real value, much like, a physical commodity.
Okay, I'm following so far. Scarcity, inherent value. What else?
And here's the big one. Bitcoin cuts out the middleman. No banks, no central authorities controlling everything. Remember how we talked about riba and the problems with traditional financial systems? Well, Bitcoin just bypasses all of that.
So it's about control, about who holds the power in the system. But, I mean, isn't Bitcoin incredibly volatile? No central authority, no regulation. It all just seems a bit, chaotic.
That's the common concern, for sure. But Irfan's point is that someone always has power, right? Whether the governments with their money printing presses or those mysterious Bitcoin whales with their massive holdings.
So it's like a question of who you trust more, I guess.
Exactly. And Irfan's argument is that Bitcoin, even with all its volatility, is ultimately more resistant to manipulation than the current system. Because right now it's controlled by, well, a relatively small group of people, wouldn't you say? He actually makes a really interesting comparison to the Quran.
The Quran. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more.
So Irfan points out that the Quran itself is kind of like a decentralized ledger, right? Memorized by millions, passed down through generations. It's incredibly resilient to corruption or alteration because it doesn't rely on a single source of truth.
Wow, that is a powerful analogy. Okay, so if Bitcoin is this, revolutionary solution, what's stopping everyone from jumping on board?
Well, it's not quite as simple as that.
Okay, so it's not quite as simple as everyone just switching to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What's the holdup?
Yeah, Irfan gets that. It's a huge paradigm shift, right? You're talking about changing the entire financial system. It's not just about convincing, individuals to use Bitcoin. It's about, it's about shifting the whole playing field.
So is he hoping for, a Bitcoin revolution or something?
He's more strategic about it than that. He really believes in engaging with the system, even those institutions he's critical of. Governments, central banks, even those guys, he thinks there's a role for them.
Really? Trying to work from within to push for change? I'm curious to know how that goes over.
It's tricky, right? He's realistic about it. He knows that real change probably won't come from the top down. But at the same time, he sees value in dialogue, planting those seeds of doubt, showing them that there are other ways of thinking about finance, other models that might actually work better.
It's like that saying, be the change you want to see. Or in this case, finance the change, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But while those conversations are happening, he's also a big believer in individual action. What can each of us do right now to align our finances with our values? He actually lays out a pretty clear, three-pronged approach.
All right, lay it on me. I'm taking notes here. What's step one?
Education. Knowledge is power,
right?
Irfan wants you to really understand what we're talking about here, what halal finance actually means, how to spot those misleading products, the ones designed to kind of trick you, like those things we were talking about, the commodity murabaha.
Right, the financial sleight of hand.
Exactly. Don't just blindly trust a halal label. Do your homework. Read the fine print.
Like those low-fat snacks that are loaded with sugar. Sounds healthy, but...
Exactly. So education is key. And then step two, put your money where your morals are. Support those companies that are actually trying to do things differently.
You mean what were those companies you mentioned?
Nestor, Finder, there are a few others. But Irfan sees them as the pioneers, the ones out there on the front lines trying to build something new.
So it's about putting your money where your mouth is, showing them that there's demand for this stuff.
100%. And then step three, and this one's big, don't be afraid to raise your voice.
Make some noise. I like it.
Exactly. Push your pension providers to offer ethical investment options. Look for banking alternatives. Let these institutions know that you're not satisfied with the status quo.
Demand better. He seems particularly passionate about the pension fund thing. Why is that?
He sees it as this, massive missed opportunity. I mean, think about it. Pension funds, they manage trillions of dollars globally. If even a fraction of that was directed towards ethical investments, it would be huge.
A game changer.
Totally.
Yeah.
But he also acknowledges the challenges there. Like even just figuring out if a company is truly ethical, it's like navigating a minefield.
Right. 1 minute you think you found a good one, then boom, commodity murabaha.
Exactly. And then there's that whole debate about the 30-30 rule for screening stocks, which, don't even get me started. But the point is, it's complicated. Like, even Irfan, with all his experience, he struggles to find perfect options in the market.
So where does that leave the rest of us? I mean, it feels like even if we agree with his critiques, most of us are still stuck dealing with, traditional banks and all that. It's hard to escape the system entirely.
He gets that. He's not, like, naive about it.
Yeah.
And he's not saying that everyone needs to, go off the grid and start trading exclusively in Bitcoin. In fact, he actually sees a role for traditional Islamic banks.
Really? I thought he was pretty critical of them.
He is, but he also sees them as a stepping stone.
Hmm.
Like at least they're trying to operate within the bounds of Islamic law, even if it's not perfect.
So it's about harm reduction, I guess. Like, if you're not ready to divest completely, at least try to minimize the damage.
Exactly. He encourages people to, minimize their reliance on banks wherever possible, opt for alternative platforms when they can. It's about being mindful of those small, everyday choices.
Those little acts of resistance.
Yeah. And it's about demanding greater transparency and accountability from the industry as a whole.
So we're talking about individual action, but also collective action, putting pressure on the system to change.
Exactly.
So we're talking about individual action, collective action. But I'm curious, what about Irfan himself? What does he do with his own money? Gotta walk the walk, right?
He actually mentions in the interview his entire pension, like everything, is in equities.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, no bonds, no traditional savings accounts, just stocks.
Huh. That's pretty bold. I can only imagine how tough that must be trying to find companies that, tick all the boxes ethically, especially when you're talking about Islamic principles.
Oh, absolutely. And he's very open about that struggle, how do you find companies that truly align with your values in a system that often feels, well, at odds with those values, to put it mildly?
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, right? Yeah.
Totally. And then you've got all these guidelines and interpretations, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds. He even mentions that whole 30-30 thing, which I know trips people up.
The 30-30 rule. Refresh my memory on that one.
It's the screening tool.
Yeah.
Right. Some scholars use it to determine if a company is, quote unquote, Sharia compliant based on their debt levels, non-liquid assets, all that.
Right.
And Irfan seems to find it, well, flawed, to say the least, but also kind of acknowledges that sometimes, you got to work with what you've got.
Finding the least bad option.
Which kind of brings us to Cordova Capital.
Right. His own venture.
This is where he's really putting his money where his mouth is,
So remind us, what makes Cordova Capital different?
So Cordova is Irfan's attempt to, build a truly Islamic finance model from the ground up, operating completely outside the traditional system. They focus on financing businesses through these direct profit-sharing agreements.
Profit sharing? So instead of giving a loan with interest, they're investing in the company and sharing the profits.
Exactly. They call them profit participating notes, or PPNs.
Right.
But it's more than just a financial structure. It's the whole philosophy behind it. They're really trying to create a model of partnership, shared risk, much more aligned with, Islamic principles of trade and investment.
So it's not just about slapping a halal label on something. They're actually trying to do business differently.
Exactly. And they do incredibly thorough due diligence on every company they work with, making sure their business practices actually align with Islamic values, not just on paper, but in practice.
So it's about the whole package, the financial return, but also the ethical framework, how that return is generated.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so interesting. Irfan's really trying to be this system where, ethics and profit aren't mutually exclusive.
I like that, where success is defined differently.
Right.
So, okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. If you had to distill it down, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they do with all this information?
I think your friend would say, it's not about blindly following a set of rules, It's about, really engaging with these questions, aligning your financial decisions with your values, whatever those values may be.
Right. Doing your research, being an informed consumer.
Yes. Asking the tough questions, challenging the status quo, demanding more from these institutions, whether it's, your bank, your pension provider, whoever.
And being open to those alternatives, the Nestors, the Finders of the world, maybe even, checking out Cordova Capital, seeing if that model resonates with you.
Totally. Because at the end of the day, we have more power than we think,
Right.
individually and collectively.
Our choices matter.
They do. Whether it's, choosing a different bank or supporting a company that's trying to do things ethically, or even just like having these conversations, raising awareness, all of it matters.
It's about planting those seeds, right? And who knows what might grow? Irfan's own story is a testament to that, right? Physics to finance, Deutsche Bank to Bitcoin. That takes some serious disruption.
And he's not done yet, which is exciting.
Yeah.
It shows that even within a system as, entrenched as global finance, change is still possible.
So if you're out there listening to this and you're feeling, disillusioned, like the system isn't working, you're not alone.
And more importantly, it doesn't have to be this way.
There are alternatives. There are people out there fighting for a better system.
So get informed, get engaged, and who knows, you might be part of building that better system.
Love it. That's a great place to end it. That's it for today's deep dive into the world of Islamic finance. We've got tons of resources for you in the show notes, including that interview with Harris Irfan, so definitely check those out. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.